Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to all of you who are joining us online across all of our platforms, and of course, welcome to the media who have joined us in person. Welcome to the Opposition's weekly press conference, where we address issues in both the local, regional, and international sphere, giving you the perspective of the opposition and addressing issues that are of public importance. Joining us today are members of Parliament, Dr. Nian Gadsby-Dolly, Marvin Gonzalez, Colin Burt, and we are also joined today by the opposition leader and the political leader, the Honorable Penelope Beckles-Robinson, who will also be speaking today. Let's move straight into the issues before us, and can I ask Dr. Gadsby-Dolly to join us at the podium.
Good morning to my colleagues, Leader of the Opposition, our Chief Whip in the Parliament, other colleagues who are here with us, members of the listening and viewing public, members of the media who are here. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning. I start off by bringing SEA greetings to all of the children who will be sitting this examination on Thursday. Best wishes to you. We know it is a big step. It's the start of an exciting new journey, and we emphasize that from the PNM on behalf of all of us. It is the start of an exciting new journey that you will be taking. I want to speak directly to parents. I've been an SEA parent 3 times, and therefore I fully understand the excitement that goes along with this SEA week. And parents, please try to project calm and confidence in your children. They have done a lot, and it would mean a lot to them if you are calm. That will translate into confidence for them. I want to remind our children that success is not dependent on the school you attend. It is much more dependent on your attitude. Hard work is the key to success regardless of what school you go to. You may go to the best school that you wanted to go to. However, if you don't work hard, you will not achieve what you intend to achieve there. I have met and I've worked with successful people who have gone to all different types of schools. Denominational secondary schools, government secondary schools, private secondary schools. And there are certain common characteristics, and that is discipline, commitment, an appetite for hard work, and a hunger for success. So I want to encourage all of our children. We are praying for you. God bless you as you step forward at the start of this journey. And we ask you to do your best. That is all anyone can ask of you. And even as we wish our students that success on Thursday, we note with extreme regret the circumstances that have arisen surrounding young Kylie Charles of Tobago, who, in the words of her father, is now distraught. And we want Kylie to know that we see you, we understand what you are going through, and we in the PNM are praying for you. Based on her SEA ranking, and that is SEA of 2025, this young lady and her family purchased tickets to attend the SEA recognition ceremony that was held recently. However, they were not invited to this ceremony, and no one would have gotten in touch with them to explain what had happened. Now, I want us to remember that this type of situation arose for the first time in 2022 regarding the SEA of 2020. And it was a very difficult time in the country, and the PNM took the decision. It was a controversial decision. Many views for and against. But we took the decision in 2022 to stop publicizing SEA rankings because there was potential for children to be hurt unnecessarily. Children at a very fragile state of their development. While this was a controversial decision, the fact is, for the past 4 years, no child has had to suffer what Kylie Charles is now being made to undergo. No child has been hurt by the fact that they were not recognized for the SEA ranking. And now that the situation has hit Tobago, we are hearing the Secretary of Education in the THE, I want to quote what he said in the newspaper report. Asked whether the division would consider scrapping the ranking of the top 5 students, Kerr said, that was Secretary Kerr, said that a revisit of the current system is clearly warranted. Kerr said the public must be reminded that the purpose of the exam, that's the SEA, is to place the students, not rank them. And these words sound very familiar. They sound very similar to what I would have said when the ranking process was stopped in 2022 to reduce the mental stress on students. And it really is a travesty that students who would have done well, who would have excelled at their examination and would have been placed at their first choice, which is the point of the examination, a placement examination. These students are experiencing anxiety, depression, trauma, because they are not ranked first or second or third, which is not the point of the examination. And the public may not know this, but a lot of these children have to seek professional help. Their parents have to seek professional help, even when they have achieved their goal, which is being placed at the school of their first choice. Under the PNM, we made several efforts to reduce the stress of this examination. We removed the pressure of the ranking. We allowed the retrieval of results in privacy, and that was the SEA online portal, and so that students no longer had to face the entire school to collect their results, because there was a huge level of stress associated with that as well. So now you can be in the privacy of your home with your parents and receive your results via the online SEA results portal that was introduced under the PNM. In addition to that, the fierce competition between schools was also removed when this ranking system was removed. And this was done systematically to reduce the stress associated with SEA, which is already a high-stakes examination. The UNC made a decision to return the SEA rankings. And fair enough, if that is the decision, if that is the policy. However, one would have expected that understanding what could be the potential for children to be hurt, one would have expected that the Minister of Education would have done his due diligence and pay careful attention to ensure that another child did not undergo what happened in 2022. Yet, 4 years later, with the benefit of having the experience of what happened in 2022, we are back in this situation again, where a young lady of Tobago is now distraught and traumatized because of this ranking system. I find that sad and disappointing, because I did expect that with a return to our policy, the UNC Minister Dowlath, would have done what is required to protect our children. It is very, very sad to see this situation, and we have heard nothing from Minister Dowlath. That seems to be his style, to say nothing when these issues arise. And it seems almost as if he is unbothered. But we are bothered in the PNM because a child is hurting unnecessarily, and we really look forward to Minister Dowlath saying something and offering an apology to the family that is traumatized by this situation. It is really a faux pas that should not have happened. I want to address one other issue very quickly, and that is the teachers' increased salary and back pay. This, of course, was promised for Christmas, and then things went dark, radio silence from both the Ministries of Education and Finance. And with this radio silence, we saw the teachers' union going to the ministries and trying to offer a letter. And then it was said that at the end of January, they would see the increased salaries and back pay. And then again, radio silence, and I guess that radio silence may have made teachers feel very unwell. And therefore, for 2 days, the teachers were quite unable to do their duties. And now the Ministry of Finance has indicated that salaries will be increased by the end of March, but there is no timeline for the back pay, and that was promised on the 27th of February. The minister did say that back pay and salary would be advanced by the end of the first quarter, which is the end of March. So that has not materialized once again, and teachers are now promised their salaries by the end of March, but there is no timeline given for the back pay, which was promised months ago. This is not an acceptable situation, and in addition to that, we have noted that Tutor has said that there are officers within the Ministry of Education who fall under the PSA who were not advanced the half or 10%, whatever it was given. They were not given that in December of 2025. So you have teachers without back pay, and you have officers within the Ministry of Education who have not received that back pay that was given to officers under the PSA in December of 2025. So we are raising this as an urgent issue, and we would like to get some response from the Minister of Education, because the Minister of Finance has said that back pays are being processed within the Ministry of Education. And if you recall, on the last occasion that this was done, I was the minister at that time, and we worked against the clock and brought in what was required to ensure that back pay for teachers was paid within a 2-month window. So we know it is achievable once the will is there, and therefore the fact that so many months have passed suggests to us that the will is not there to pay the teachers the back pay that they deserve. So we ask again for the Minister of Education, we call on the Minister of Education to address this issue and give us the timeline that is associated with the payment of the back pay to the teachers who so greatly deserve it. Thank you very kindly.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gadsby Dolly. As a parent who is not so far removed from the stress of SEA, I also want to thank you. Both my children sat SEA while you sat as the Minister of Education, along with our former colleague, Lisa Morris-Julian. The deafening silence of the Minister of Education on this retrograde step by a government who has claimed to be lovers of children, to return to a system that simply drives anxiety in children and parents, is indeed scary for us and worrying. Can I ask Member of Parliament Marvin Gonzalez to join us at the podium now?
Thank you very much, Simon. Good morning to the Leader of the Opposition and my colleagues in the lower house as well as in the Senate. Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. This morning, I come to discuss 3 matters that have been occupying our attention as a country. The first one is in relation to the situation in the constituency of Tobago Sangre Grande, where we would have seen a well-known businessman was murdered, and even recent reports of a murder by one of his employees and other crimes being pursued against his children. Trinidad and Tobago, this matter is a very serious national concern that should capture the attention of every single citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. You would recall that not too long ago, there were newspaper reports saying that in the lead up to the 2025 general elections, one Danny Guerra, a famous businessman in the constituency of Sangre Grande, contributed over $20 million to the UNC campaign, which was instrumental in the UNC capturing the constituency of Tobago Sangre Grande. After the general elections, UNC, of course, winning that seat, there were reports that there have been threats, or there were threats, to certain government ministers, including the Minister of Defense. And those threats were somehow attributed to one Danny Guerra, who was recently murdered. And there were also reports that Danny Guerra played an instrumental role in the UNC capturing the Toco Sangre Grande seat, contributing over 17 or $20 million. There were also reports and videos of Danny Guerra dancing with the Minister of Defense when he was a candidate in that election, in that campaign. When the first state of emergency was declared by the UNC, there was a detention order signed by none other than Roger Alexander, the Minister of Homeland Security. And let me remind you, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, what this detention order was all about. And I quote from a newspaper article. A detention order signed by Homeland Security Roger Alexander on November the 19th accused Guerra of posing an imminent threat to public safety, including an alleged plot to assassinate a government minister. The order states that Guerra's group has access to high-powered firearms and intends to escalate attacks against rival gangs in public spaces and is involved in the trafficking of illegal arms, money laundering, and illegal quarrying. It adds that preventative detention under Regulation 14 of the Emergency Power Regulations 2025 is necessary to disrupt operational planning and prevent further violence. Let me also refer and remind you of another newspaper article published by Mark Besant on August the 19th, 2025. And I quote from that article. Sources say that this wanted man closely associated with a well-known Toco Sangre Grande contractor and another contractor from the Santa Cruz area had pumped close to $20 million into the 2025 UNC election campaign with the promised payback of sweetheart contracts through the flagship state programs. Intelligence sources told the Express that the well-known contractor from the Toco Sangre Grande area was also a major financier of the resistance gang, and one of his relatives serves as the gang's point man in that area. Ladies and gentlemen, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, we have to ask ourselves a very serious question and confront the elephant in the room. So far, based on published newspaper reports, which also was supported by someone, a known businessman in the Sangre Grande area, who was closely associated with the said Danny Guerra, confirmed that he was of the view and he was aware that Danny Guerra pumped over $20 million into the UNC campaign. And that was contrary to advice that he himself would have given Danny Guerra, that despite the fact that you may be contributing to election campaign, to stay away from the front line. I just read to you the detention order and reports linking one Danny Guerra to gang violence and other serious crimes in Trinidad and Tobago. And Wayne Sturge, who was the candidate for the Toco Sangre Grande seat and is now the Minister of Defense in the government of Trinidad and Tobago. This morning, the opposition is calling upon the Prime Minister to immediately remove Wayne Sturge from the government and the cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago because, based on these reports, having not been addressed by the Prime Minister, who is the chairman of the National Security Council, this is a serious threat to national security in Trinidad and Tobago. Wayne Sturge, as Minister of Defense, has access to confidential intelligence information relating to the security of Trinidad and Tobago. And based on these reports, he is an example of a fruit from a poison tree that benefited significantly from what appears to be criminal wrongdoing in the election campaign. This person is unfit to hold public office in Trinidad and Tobago. We raised the issue some weeks ago, and today we are reminding the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago that in the midst of a state of emergency which cannot contain the rising murders that are taking place, we now have to ask ourselves whether this state of emergency was called by this government to address crime and insecurity in Trinidad and Tobago, or whether the government is in self-preservation mode based on deals they would have made with the criminal elements in Trinidad and Tobago, based on the fact that many of them who benefited from their association with criminals in the election campaign of 2025 cannot walk their constituencies. And the chickens are now coming home to roost. And a state of public emergency is now declared all over Trinidad and Tobago, not to confront crime and criminality in Trinidad and Tobago. It is because of deals that the UNC made with criminals in this country that they cannot deliver upon at this point in time. This is the real reason we have a state of emergency in Trinidad and Tobago, and we must call it out for what it is. It is the elephant in the room, and we must not be afraid to call it out for what it is. The state of emergency has nothing to do with crime and murders in Trinidad and Tobago. It has everything to do with deals that were made with criminals that the government has now found itself in a very difficult place and cannot deliver upon those deals. And Trinidad and Tobago now has to live with a public state of emergency. Today, the constituency of Toco Sangre Grande is reaping the whirlwind from those evil deals, and it is now a killing field in Trinidad and Tobago. This is a very serious state of affairs in Trinidad and Tobago, and it strikes at the heart of national security in Trinidad and Tobago, engulfing and involving the Minister of Defense in the cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago. And if the Prime Minister is unable to confront this cancer that now resides in the heart of her cabinet, then she is unfit to hold and occupy the office of Prime Minister in Trinidad and Tobago, and she has no moral authority to speak to us on any issue with respect to crime and criminality in this country. None whatsoever. The other issue I want to raise is the radar that was placed in Tobago. And we were told, as citizens of this country, was placed there to assist law enforcement in the fight against crime, in the fight against narco trafficking, human trafficking. The Prime Minister would have gone all out of her way to convince us in Trinidad and Tobago that this radar was instrumental and was placed there to assist our local law enforcement agencies in the fight against crime and narco trafficking. The Minister of Defense a month ago told the people of Trinidad and Tobago that the radar and the soldiers, the US soldiers that are in Tobago, will be there for an indefinite period of time because they are needed in the fight against crime, drug trafficking, narco trafficking, and human trafficking. And less than 2 weeks after the minister give the undertaking that the radar will be there to assist law enforcement, the radar was removed. The soldiers have left Tobago and they have gone on their next international excursion. I want to ask the government, and I want to ask you, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, is it that we are no longer going to have, or we no longer have, the issue of drug trafficking and narco trafficking in Trinidad and Tobago? Is it that we no longer have the issue of porous borders in Trinidad and Tobago? Have all those issues now been obliterated, that there is now no need for a radar if, according to the Prime Minister, the radar was there to fight these criminal scourges? We are not fools, and we are not going to digest the daily diet of lies that we are fed by the Prime Minister and her ministers in this government. We are not fools, Prime Minister. And what this demonstrates, the removal of the radar and the removal of the U.S. soldiers in Tobago, confirm the position of the leader of the opposition and the opposition that the Prime Minister and her government needed to come clean with the population and tell us what was the main purpose for the installation of that radar in Tobago. You would recall that when that first hit the news, the Prime Minister said it had something to do with the construction of a road at the ANR International Airport. And when she was further pressed, she had to confirm what was the main purpose of the radar. And what they fed this country was the fact that the radar was placed there to fight crime and to assist local law enforcement agencies. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not fools. We are not fools. You would recall that as senior law enforcement officials in this country told us that the radar was responsible for the confiscation of $171 million in drugs in the Caroni Swamp, with no one being arrested. And for every single and every ounce of drug being confiscated by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the Prime Minister, the Minister of Homeland Security, and the Minister of Defense, and unfortunately the Commissioner of Police, attributed these successes to the radar. And less than 2 weeks after the Minister of Defense said that the radar will be with us together with U.S. military officials, will be with us for an indefinite period of time, we woke up one morning to the news that the radar was being dismantled and the soldiers being removed to another space or another place where our partners may have better interests. And the last point that I want to raise is that letter that was issued by the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago to GML. And that letter arrived from my mailbox, or in my mailbox, from inside of the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. I don't want to read the content of the letter. It will be on the screen, where the letter threatened GML for certain publications that they would have made that they deemed to be offensive or derogatory. This morning, the opposition is asking the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, where were you when all of us were called pedophiles by the Prime Minister? Where were you, Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, when independent senators were described as bootlickers and low-level PNM functionaries? Where were you, Tat, when the Prime Minister, referring to a member of the PNM weeks ago, that she was going to cuff you down or cuff him down, referring to the member for Diego Martin Northeast. Where was that when the Prime Minister, pointing to our colleague from Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West, and talking to the leader of the opposition, telling the leader of the opposition in response to a legitimate question posed by the leader of the opposition, to go and ask your small pin lawyer? Where was that when all of us in the PNM and in the leadership of the PNM was being deemed as being involved in narco trafficking and constructing Balize House from the proceeds of drugs and other criminal activities? Where was that when all of these matters were being broadcast in the media? Where was the outrage by that, and where was the outrage by segments of the population? I want to remind Trinidad and Tobago that this latest letter by TAT ought not to be seen in isolation. It comes on the heels of the fact that the government continues to invoke standing orders of the parliament not to answer legitimate questions posed by the opposition. It comes on the heels of the fact that we cannot ask the Prime Minister supplemental questions in the parliament, a long tradition enjoyed by all of the parliaments since 2014. It comes on the heels of the fact that ministers of defense and Homeland Security continued to invoke national security consideration not to answer legitimate questions of the government from the opposition and members of the media. It comes on the heels of the muting of microphones by Calypsonians and the censoring of Calypsonians who dare criticize the government. It comes on the heels of the government threatening to bring laws to prevent citizens from disseminating information into the public that the government may seem and may deem to be uncomfortable, including online commentators and bloggers. This latest conduct on the part of the government against the media must be seen in that context. And this letter that was written by TAT, we in the opposition is saying that it is a demonstration and a continuation on the part of the government to attack our democratic and our constitutional freedoms, and we will not tolerate it. And we will stand on the side of every good citizen to defend our constitutional rights and to defend our republic. And this morning, not to protect or defend GML, because we are almost certain that GML has the resources to defend itself, but this letter will be ripped up by the opposition to demonstrate to the government that we will stand in defense of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief Whip. Might I also add that it comes on the heels of the government ending post-cabinet press conferences whenever questions get too hard for them to answer. A government that tries to silence the media and tries to silence the population is a government that you have to watch closely. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite Member of Parliament Colin Burt to the podium now.
Good morning. I am just here to speak about one matter, and I will answer any reasonable question afterwards that I feel competent to answer on other topics. There was a story in The Guardian on 3 days ago, written by Elizabeth Gonzalez, entitled, "Hilton Considers Exit from Trinidad, and the story quotes liberally from a local quantity surveyor by the name of Afri Raymond and unnamed sources. Quite a bit of what is in the article is misleading. There's another article that is either today or yesterday regarding the reassignment of ETech. That's, I think it's Emerging Technologies, I believe, is what ETech is, from the Ministry of Trade and Industry, where it has been for as long as I know myself in politics, to the Ministry of Land and Legal Affairs. And that story accurately says that it was shifted from Kama Miraj's ministry to Saddam Hussein's ministry based, well, I can't speak to the accuracy of this part, based on a disagreement between the chairman of ETech, who happens to be the wife of the president of the Senate, Wade Mark, and the Ministry of Trade, or the Minister of Trade. When you read the article, that appears to have been the reason for the shift of ETech from trade to the land ministry. And the argument is over the authority of the minister or the ministry to give instructions to the board of directors of ETech with respect to the Hilton Hotel in particular. Now, as I said, this article, written in The Guardian a couple days ago, 3 days ago, has a lot of inaccuracies in it. So I brought with me a copy of the deed of lease, which is dated June 2006. Actually, the TIDCO took over from IDC and became Enterprise Development Company. But it's a lease between ETech and the previous entities that were involved in the promotion of trade and industry, such as the Industrial Development Corporation and Hilton Trinidad. And this lease set out the terms of the arrangement between the government, where ETech is essentially a state enterprise, not essentially is a state enterprise, wholly owned, and the Hilton. And what this lease said was that the government, through ETech, would continue to own the hotel, which has since 1962, when the hotel was opened or built. And it has always been the policy of the government to own the asset, similar to the Hyatt Hotel. Hyatt Hotel is owned by the government through UDCOT, and to enter into a management contract with the Hilton. So the Hilton has operated under a management contract with Hilton International since the early 1960s. So if you do the maths, that's over 60 years. So that what this lease, this 2006 lease did, was simply continue what had been done for about 50 years or 40 years prior to that, which is that the government, through ETech or whichever agency the property is vested in, would continue to own it, and they would lease it to Hilton. And there are a number of things in here which are interesting, such as Hilton has the right to manage the hotel as it sees fit. I'm paraphrasing, but essentially that's what it says. And that Hilton will pay to ETech a certain amount every year as annual rental, and I'm reading from Article 4 of the lease, equal to 76% of the adjusted gross operating profit. Now, the adjusted gross operating profit is all the income from the hotel, from the rooms in the hotel, from the rental of the ballroom, they have some commercial space and so on. All the income it derives from the management of its space, minus operating expenses, so that Hilton pays ETech 76% of the remainder after the total income is affected by deduction of all the operating expenses of the hotel. And I have some information now on the income that E-Tech got from the hotel over a period of years. And it started off in 2009, about 13 million, continued along that way, 2010, 13, 2011, 16 million, 2012, 18 million, 2013, there was a big bump, 25 million, 2014, 32 million, 2015, 30 million, 2016, 26 million, dropped down to 19 million in 2017, went back up to 21 million in 2019. So that, I would say if you average it, I would say that Hilton was paying somewhere in the vicinity of $20 million a year to E-Tech for rent of the hotel, being 76% of the adjusted profit after deduction of expenses. So you take that over a period of time, you will see that E-Tech has received many millions of dollars. And the IDC and TITCO and so on over the years have received many millions of dollars from Hilton International for renting the hotel. So it's simply, E-Tech is leasing the hotel to Hilton. Hilton operates it, collects all the income, then takes out all its operating expenses, then pays 76% of the profit to E-Tech. So over this period I'm just looking at here, from 2009 to 2019, that's about 11 years, over $200 million would have been paid to E-Tech, and over its period from 1962 come up, it would be far more than that, obviously. Now, because the government, through E-Tech and its predecessors, was the owner, the government agreed, state agreed, that any capital repairs and any substantial renovations to the hotel would be paid for by the government. And that was done for the Summit of the Americas. So you may not remember, or some of you may not even have been around, but over $500 million was spent by the government to renovate the Hilton Hotel for the Summit of Americas. Over $500 million. And then, between that period and the current date, my information tells me that another 400 odd million was spent by the government through E-Tech to renovate and maintain the Hilton Hotel. So it's an expensive undertaking. But all governments, except perhaps this one, have formed the view that the Hilton is important. So its value goes far beyond money spent on money earned on the Hilton. It creates employment. It's a flagship brand. It's a tourism facility. It contributes in no small way to the marketing of Trinidad and Tobago. And there are spin-off industries that would supply the Hilton in terms of food and beverages and furniture and other supplies that any hotel would use. So all governments have not looked at this thing simply from an accounting perspective. The governments have recognized, and the government I was a part of recognized the Hilton was important, and it was necessary to do what was required to be done. So the lease agreement expired in 2013, and a variation was then entered into between E-Tech and the Hilton in 2023. It looks like August, 4th day of August 2023. You know, lawyers' handwriting, not of the best. But it looks like August 2023. A variation was entered into extending the original lease, which has the 76% of profits going to E-Tech as the holder of the head lease, and then E-Tech being responsible for major works and major infrastructure and refurbishment and so on. And all the other terms, the Hilton having the sole discretion to manage the hotel as it sees fit in accordance with its own standards and so on. That was extended for 1 year with a allowance for a further year. So essentially this variation that was entered into in 2023 allowed the original lease to continue until September of 2025. That's what I saw inside of here. Now that date is important because that is after the general election of April 2025. We as a government decided, the Hilton came to us, the lease was coming to an end in 2023, the Hilton came to the government, and just let me clear up something. It has always been under the Ministry of Trade. It's a novel innovation for it to go somewhere else. It is always because the Magdalena was under trade and so on. So that ministry was, at one time that ministry was called Trade, Industry and Tourism, at one time, way back 30 years ago. So the view was always that that ministry was best placed to be responsible for this entity, the management of the Hilton Hotel. What obviously happened, because Hilton came to the Ministry of Trade and said, look, the lease is expiring in 2013, because that is the first inaccuracy in the article that I would like to point out. One of the mistakes that the Guardian made was to talk to someone who has absolutely no information or knowledge of what is really going on, and that is quite common in Trinidad and Tobago. There are people who present themselves as experts, but they don't know anything. They have bits and pieces of information, but they're not involved in an intimate way. For example, they don't have a copy of this, the variation to the release in 2023. They don't have a copy of the operating expenses, the operating profit, etc. They just talk. So one of the things that I saw in this article was a criticism that why on earth would anybody want to extend a hotel lease for just 1 year? The reason is simple. The Hilton came to the government and said, look, even though you spent hundreds of millions of dollars refurbishing this hotel for the Summit of the Americas in 2009, and even though since then, from 2009 up to 2023 or 2021, which I think is when the discussions began, you spent another several $100 million. You need to spend some more money to deal with the hotel. Remember, this hotel is over 60 years old. So some of the items of work that needed to be done, and there was agreement on the part of the government that these things need to be done. The roof needed to be significantly repaired, in many parts virtually replaced. Structural repairs needed to be done. This is a 60-plus-year-old structure. The plumbing, the electrical, all dating back to the 60s and 70s and so on. And therefore, all of this work needed to be done. This is not something you do every day. I mean, you're talking 50, 60 years later, you're now dealing with a complete overhaul of the electrical, the plumbing, the roof, the elevators, etc. And between the period 2020 to 2022, some $15 million was spent on dealing with the pool, for example. No major work had been done on the pool and the pool deck and so on. And no work had been done upgrading elevators after the Summit of the Americas. So between 2020 and 2025, some $15 million was spent on that kind of work. After that, in accordance with an agreement between the government and Hilton, the roof repairs were substantially completed. There was a landslip that needed to be repaired, and there was an agreement that the rooms would be refurbished based on a model room that would be created by an architect hired by Hilton International. These are some of the things these experts who just pop up would not know. So that there was an agreement that Hilton would send its architect, its specialist architect, to create a model room. It would be costed, and there are about 378 rooms in the hotel, that's my understanding. And then the cost of refurbishing the rooms, which would be the furniture, the wall finishes, the bathrooms, the blinds, that sort of thing. It would all be costed and see whether it fit within the budget, because the agreed figure that the government had agreed to pay on this third occasion was $400 million. So there were a lot of discussions between Hilton and the government, but agreement was finally reached that the government, through ETEC, would spend $400 million refurbishing the hotel, and quite a bit of that money was spent before the general election. What went wrong after the general election is that the government, the new government, took a long time to put in a new board of ETEC, so that created a delay. As a result, I understand the model room has not been agreed to yet. The model room should have been sorted out around May or June of 2025, so almost a year later. There's no agreement on what this model room should have in it. And the extension of this expired in 2025. Apparently, that's the big argument between, I have to rely on what the Guardian said. I don't want to be sued, so I'm just quoting what the Guardian say, that there was a disagreement about extending the lease beyond September 2025, and that the minister asked, or the Ministry of Trade asked the chairman of ETEC, who is Wade Mark's wife, could you please extend this thing beyond September 2025? And apparently there was disagreement over that. And then there was disagreement about the cost of it, the source of funds, and so on. The bottom line is, the new government came in, they met a work in progress, they met everything agreed to, they met a schedule of works, they knew what the cost would be, they knew what needed to be done, and they simply didn't do it. So if you are somebody like Hilton International, and you have an arrangement with a previous government that the government would spend $400 million bringing the hotel up to its standards, and then you would enter into a new long-term lease, and that's why this statement about why on earth would anybody just extend something from a year is just ridiculous, because that was just a holding period, so that you settle everything, you agree on how you're going to refurbish this hotel, and then you enter into a new 10-year or 15-year lease, as the case may be, standard business practice. So the new government just fell down on the job. And I was quite disappointed to see that there was such a dispute between the Minister of Trade, allegedly, and the chairman of ETEC, allegedly. It seems that, that is what they say when elephants dance, or cockroach have no place in foul party. So it looks like Mr. Maraj was on the losing end of that, because ETEC has now been moved to the Ministry of Land, and who knows what's going to happen. But I couldn't understand Hilton's problem. What's going on? The thing expired in September 25. What's the government doing? You have to come up with the money to finish the project. You have to agree on the refurbishment details. Apparently none of this has been done, and they've just spent all the time arguing amongst themselves and some kind of internal power play, and I hope they fix this. I certainly hope so. Now they've shifted it to Saddam Hussein's ministry. Maybe he will have the sense, the good sense, to resolve this matter, because this had all been settled before. Okay? So that's the true story. It is the previous government put everything in place to have the Hilton refurbished and a new long-term lease to the satisfaction of Hilton sorted out, and the new government just dropped the ball and just made a mess of everything. Okay?
Thank you very much, MP Imbert. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now joined by the opposition leader, political leader of the People's National Movement, the Honorable Penelope Beckles-Robinson.
Thank you very much, Simon, and let me, of course, acknowledge my colleagues who are here with me for this press conference, the Honorable Nyan Gadsby-Dolly, the Honorable Marvin Gonzalez, and the Honorable Colm Imbert. I'm going to deal with two matters, and let me deal first of all with an issue affecting nurses. You would have realized that in the public domain there was a letter, an article from The Guardian. Nurses threatened to withhold extra duty as row over pay escalates. And why is this matter important? The issue of healthcare is always important to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But more importantly, the nurses have indicated that they propose to have a demonstration on April 10th. And they have also indicated that there's likely to be a demonstration actually in Sandy Grande this week. And can you just pass me? So I just realized that there is an article that I saw just a few minutes ago that I want to make reference to. And it deals precisely with this situation. One of the things that I was very interested in is the fact that this government, in taking this decision, did not consult with the Trinidad and Tobago Nurses Association. But if you go to their page, you will see that they indicated that a meeting took place last night. NCRHA nurses leaders receive severe tongue lashing. So it says that they were summoned, this is senior nurses were summoned to this meeting. And this meeting took place for more than 4 hours. Nursing and midwifery leaders, they were subjected to verbal insults, berating, and unprofessional conduct. Many left the meeting visibly shaken, humiliated, and questioning their future within the institution. This is basically what some of the decisions were. Immediate shutdown of the nurse-led liaison unit, reduction of all extra duty for nurses and midwifery personnel across the board, Cora nurses banned from participating in pool assignments, doctors mandated to review and approve nursing rosters, increased hiring of PCAs to fill roles traditionally held by RNs, LMs, and ENAs, general manager of nursing duties slashed in half. Of course, a statement is put out as it relates to this. And as I said, why is this important? This is important because we know in Trinidad and Tobago the importance of healthcare. We know that traditionally we have had a situation where a number of our nurses have migrated and are working elsewhere, whether it's in the United States, or whether it's in Dubai, whether it is in Britain. I don't think that any Trinidadian and Tobagonian is not aware that Trinidad and Tobago nurses are sought after internationally. And similar to the traffic fines and a number of new initiatives of this government, the nurses in Trinidad and Tobago woke up to this decision where their pool and extra duty rates have been reduced. And my question, as always, is this is a government that promised consultation. So we find ourselves as a people going to sleep and waking up with new traffic fines, losing your jobs, and so on. This is now the policy and practice of this government. So the question we ask ourselves, what is the true intention of this government? Now, this is what the minister is saying. The minister is saying that there is an issue where the regional health authority workers fall outside the remit of the chief personnel officer when it comes to issue of salary increases. The Ministry of Health is saying that what they are doing is, it is not a reduction in pay, but it's a correction of inconsistencies. The minister said that a review across all RHAs found that the North Central Regional Health Authority had been paying nurses personnel above the CPO approved rates in 2020. So what you have a situation where for a very long time you had what is called a pool, and you had non-critical nurses falling under the category of non-critical and emergency. And for several years, because of the fact that nurses would have, through their own cost, and maybe sometimes the government, improve your skills, specialized in certain areas. As a result of that, you got this additional funds for dealing with what is the specialized case. This government has now come and they are now saying, this is what the minister is saying, the NCRHA implemented corrective measures to align its payment with the approved CPO rates. The adjustment does not represent a reduction, but a standardization to ensure consistency and equity across all RHAs. Now imagine, if you were getting an additional $75 or $60 based on the fact that you were working in a non-critical or in an emergency area, and they have now removed this, they are telling you that is not a reduction. That is a standardization. That is an alignment. So if you go now at the end of the day to the bank and you are getting less money, they're telling you, I didn't reduce your money, I just align it. That is the logic of this government, which makes absolutely no sense. And what they are doing now is they are simply putting it at the heels of the CPO and saying, well, it's not the government, it's not us, it's the CPO. And I want to ask the nurses and the people of Trinidad and Tobago, is that what a lot of you voted for? This, when UNC wins, everybody wins. Because that is imagine that you do not even call the Nurses Association. You do not discuss it with them. You do not consult. But now that they have raised in the public domain that they are going to protest and they have applied to the police to protest, you call them and you bully them and you threaten them. But further to that, what is important is the nurses are still on the 2013 salary. We know it is no secret what was offered by the People's National Movement. This government came and said, you're going to get 10%, you're going to get everything in cash. Now it's a different story. Non-cash, cash, and for the RHA workers, they are still waiting patiently. So we want to ask the government, please clear the air on this situation. Tell us what is your position, and so that you don't have a situation where the moral of the nurses are clearly, this is something that is not going to incentivize them. They are not going to feel that nursing is a valued profession the way this government is operating. So I'm calling on the minister, please. Please clear the air so that this protest that the nurses are going to have, because they are of the view that you are interfering with their terms and conditions without consultation, without even dealing with them fairly, and without acknowledging that this was a situation that was in place for years. Further to that, as a country, we know the duty that we owe to the nurses, particularly following COVID. We know the commitment, we know not just the challenges, but we understand what nurses and doctors did for Trinidad and Tobago during COVID. But in less than a year, consistent with their policy dealing with CPEP, dealing with URP, dealing with so many people who have lost their jobs, you come again with another measure to demoralize the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Now you have to tell the people of Trinidad and Tobago, is it a budgetary issue? Is it a budgetary issue, or is it that you simply wake up almost a year later, because we are just going to be a little more than a month away from the election? Is it that you just wake up and you decide that you are going to align and standardize? Because there is a cabinet note. I'm sure there must be a cabinet note that would have given instructions first and foremost as it relates to the pool rates. But there must be a cabinet decision now that would have said, listen, you are going to rescind that decision that was made some time ago, and you are no longer going to deal with giving people this extra duty. So the government has to come clean, and they must say to the nurses, the Minister of Health must come and make it abundantly clear and say this is the new policy of the government based on a cabinet decision to deny the nurses this pool rate that has existed for a very long time. And if you are removing that, what is the alternative? And they must also tell us whether this meeting that the nurses are referring to actually took place last night, and whether in truth and in fact they bullied several of the nurses and doctors. The second matter that I want to deal with has to do with the issue of Cuba. Now, we are aware that there is literally a humanitarian crisis in Cuba. We understand that there are nationwide blackouts, there's collapse of the electricity infrastructure, there's a strain on hospitals, the healthcare system, the water, whether it's whether it's food, whether it's public transportation. We know that there are daily blackouts for almost 16 hours. There's an issue as it relates to food, medicine, and basic supplies. We also know that CARICOM took a decision, and CARICOM took a decision and agreed that there was a humanitarian crisis and that CARICOM would assist Cuba in this respect. Of course, we were waiting to hear what is the position of Trinidad and Tobago. But as usual, this is one of the areas where Trinidad and Tobago is disassociating itself from CARICOM and from the calls to end the Cuba blockade. There was a recent CELAC meeting, and in that meeting, Trinidad and Tobago withdrew support for elements of the zone of peace. Now, I just want to make reference to a newspaper article, which you can look at some point in time, which says, TNT blanks CELAC initiative for the end of the U.S. blockade of Cuba. And it is self-explanatory. But why is this important for us? It is important for us because this is a continuation of the position taken by our Prime Minister since our Prime Minister went to the United Nations sometime last year. And a total change from what has been the core principles of Trinidad and Tobago for many years. What is that? It has to do with issues of respect for sovereignty, Caribbean first diplomacy, and the whole issue of non-alignment. What is the consequences of this to the people of Trinidad and Tobago? And again, there is an article in The Guardian written by Stephen Nicholas. Amid certain future fearful Cuban medics make appeal to TNT authorities. Now, why is this so important for us? It is so important for us because we know what is the position that has been taken by Guyana and what is the position that has been taken by Jamaica. We know that as it relates to Jamaica, it was almost a 50-year arrangement between Jamaica and Cuba as it relates to the provision of doctors and medical services. Likewise, Guyana. And we know that in both cases it has been rescinded. We also know that Trinidad and Tobago, like many other CARICOM countries and several other countries in Africa, have had the benefit of the expertise of Cuban doctors. United States, as a matter of fact, has had the benefit of expertise from Cuba. But when you look at this article here, and this is specifically now speaking to Tobago, because the Tobagonians are expressing some concern that if they no longer have the benefit of Cuban doctors, that the healthcare system may be in some form of a crisis. In this article, they have spoken to a Cuban doctor who basically explains what is the situation and indicates that they basically, some of them are on contract. They indicate that when that contract is finished, they can apply to the Tobago Regional Health Authority, similar to Trinidad and Tobago. You are interviewed, and they indicate that a portion of their money is kept and a portion of the money is sent back to Cuba. So they are very concerned as to what is the position that will be taken by Trinidad and Tobago. Now, we know very well that we have had a situation where there are several questions when you ask this government, they do not answer. And again, if you look at today's papers, you would see that there were several questions asked to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, which he did not answer. So I have a couple questions that I want to ask this government. I want to ask this government whether or not they are in contact with Trinidad students who are resident in Cuba, and whether there is any indication for evacuation of those students. I want to ask the Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs whether they are planning to end diplomatic relations with Cuba, and whether or not they intend to close the embassy in Cuba. I also want to ask the government whether they are willing to sacrifice all the values and standards of this country and CARICOM on the altar of some sort of foreign script, and whether or not this country really is in control of our foreign policy. So tell us what is happening, and don't just leave it for us to assume, particularly if you have sight of the order paper yesterday, which you must look at, because this is linked to the Prime Minister herself failing to make herself available to the press, whether she travels, whether she's here, she's failing to make herself available. So these very critical questions can be answered. So let me just share with you quickly that some of the questions asked. Given public statements linking United States conquer narcotics action with the broader energy security consideration, can the minister state the policy position of the government in this regard? No answer. Having regard to the statements made by the country's representative at the UN Security Council meeting held on January 2026, can the minister advise what is the government's stance on the application of the UN Charter, the principle of non-intervention, and the prohibition on the use of force? No answer. Can the minister advise on what did the government base its decision when it expressed support for the United States actions described as targeting narco-terrorism in relation to Venezuela? And two, whether the government's support is confined to counter narcotics and transactional crime suppression objectives. Now, why is this important? It is important because this is what the government would do from time to time. Invoke Standing Order 26.3, which states, inter alia, a minister may decline to answer a question if, in his opinion, the publication of the answer would be contrary to the public interest. Now, we are tabulating the amount of times this government is using that section, because several questions have been asked by the Honorable Marvin Gonzalez, by several other members in the parliament, and this is the section they are using in order to deny the people of Trinidad and Tobago information as it relates to their policy on several matters. So a lot of issues relating to national security, they use that section. In their opinion, they believe that the information should not be shared with the public. But if it is, you have offered yourself to lead the country. If it is that you are saying to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, you are the Prime Minister, you are the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but you want to make all kinds of statements in the public domain, but you don't want to answer. You want to hide behind a section in the regulations and rules of the Parliament in order to deny the public certain information. And we are saying that this government is a pack of cowards. That's what they are, a pack of cowards. If you have a position and you have sat and you have discussed it in the cabinet, you have gotten the appropriate advice, assuming that they have gotten the appropriate advice and recommendation, then you must be able to stand firm, you must be able to stand proud, and you must be able to say to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, I have taken this position based on research, based on advice, and based on what is important in the interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, not what is in your interest. And you cannot be a coward, and you cannot keep hiding, and you cannot be governing by WhatsApp and by TikTok and by Facebook. Come and make yourself available to the people of Trinidad and Tobago so you can be questioned, like every single one of us who are here, that we are prepared at all times to answer to the people of Trinidad and Tobago and to say to you that when the time comes, we will be ready to govern Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Opposition Leader. Ladies and gentlemen, a pack of cowards led by a Prime Minister in hiding. We are now moving on to the question and answer segment of our press conference. As always, housekeeping dictates that members of the media will give their name and the media house that they represent, and of course ask your question addressed to whatever member is here. See, the mic is...
Well, a question to the opposition leader.
I'm opposition leader.
You raised, opposition leader, you raised the matter concerning the nurses
Yes.
and so on at the NCRHA. I'm just wondering, in terms of during the previous administration, which you were part of, was that issue, how was that dealt with in terms of the incentive for the pool arrangement in health authorities for nurses?
Yes, that existed. That for the last 10 years, that was, I mean, I don't know exactly, Ms. Hemwitt, I know you were Minister of Health. Do you recall whether exactly when that started, the payment of the pool rates? But even if I don't know exactly when it was started, what I'm clear about is that was something that existed under our tenure.
And so what you're seeing now,
Yeah.
because from what you have said, the issue of consultation that you felt, or the opposition feels is, as far as you are concerned, was not evident in how this matter was treated by the relevant authority.
Yeah, because what is clear is they waited until the Trinidad and Tobago Nurses Association put out a release and say, listen, we are not happy with this. We have applied to the Commissioner of Police to March, and of course then they are coming with this analysis that said, which they are admitting that they have made the changes and they would not be paying this extra duty, and give a reason because this is something that really should be dealt with by the CPO, and saying basically that the RHAs and the NCRHAs don't have the authority. In that same article, you would see the head of the Nurses Association indicated that they did a freedom of information and inquiry, which said that that decision to pay that extra duty is really for the CEOs and not the CPOs, but the government is saying something entirely different.
Is that a matter the opposition, will that be one of the matters the opposition will seek further answers on during the mid-year review debate in the Parliament of the budget? Absolutely,
because as I said, is it an issue is it a budget issue? I mean, when did this become an issue? And if it is, you are in negotiations with the civil servants and you indicated you're going to pay back pay, and you know that the nurses are operating on 2013 salaries. So if they're operating on 2013 salaries, yes, it might look like a $75 or $60 mightn't be important to you, but just like every other worker, CPEP, URP, anybody who loses a job or anybody who loses any form of income, that definitely puts you at a disadvantage.
A question for MP Gonzalez. There are some Based on your one of the points that you raised, calling for Minister Sturge to be fired, citing his relationship with now deceased Danny Guerra, there are some reports that Danny Guerra would have at one point supported the PNM and the PNM's candidate for Toco Sangre Grande. How would you respond to concerns that at that time he would have been affiliated with now the opposition?
I'm not seeing evidence of that. I have not seen evidence of that. And everything I said here this morning, I pointed to information that has been published in the press. Unless and until I see what you are referring to, I am more than prepared to respond to it. I have not seen the former MP, Roger Monroe, dancing in a video with Danny Guerra. I have not seen Danny Guerra being in the front line. I have not seen evidence and information that he sponsored the PNM campaign in any previous elections. I have not seen that. What we have seen is that he has been a frontline person for the UNC in the 2025 elections. He has appeared in videos, numerous videos, with the current Minister of Defense in the election campaign. And we would have seen a report from Guardian Media, where a very close associate of Danny Guerra confirming that he sponsored and contributed significantly to the election campaign for the UNC to capture that Sangre Grande seat.
Acknowledging that there's no campaign finance reform and there's no legislation that speaks to how parties should be funded and by whom, but do you think that considering the accusations that were leveled against Guerra and other entities, because you were on our morning program, you said that the UNC was financed by certain elements.
Yes.
Do you think that the police ought to be launching an investigation into any of these claims? The
police should be launching, and the police should be at the forefront investigating these matters. The police should be doing that, and the concern that I raise here at this podium is that the person who benefited, obviously, from Mr. Guerra's involvement in the UNC campaign is the current Minister of Defense, who has access to confidential information and who is a member of the National Security Council. That should scandalize every citizen of this country. And he was placed there on the National Security Council by the Prime Minister. And why isn't that being a serious matter that is being discussed in this country? And this is the same minister who stood up in the parliament and made some interesting revelations about the death of Dana Sita-Hall. This can't be normal in this country. And I'm saying here again that the state of emergency that exists in this country has nothing to do with crime and criminality. The government is in self-preservation mode. That is what the state of emergency is all about. And we must stop avoiding confronting these matters. There are elephants in the room. And if we are serious about tackling crime and criminality in Trinidad and Tobago, we have to call it out for what it is. This is the same Prime Minister who accused us in the PNM of all manners of things, especially being involved in drug trafficking, being pedophiles. And she has that minister in her cabinet in charge of our defense. Defending what, I ask? Defending what? And we have to confront these matters frontally. And if we are not prepared to confront it, then we are spinning top in mud. This is a very serious issue facing the security and the stability of Trinidad and Tobago, and the Prime Minister has this gentleman being in charge of our defense, speaking to our international counterparts. You feel the Americans are not aware of the background of Wayne Sturge? You feel they are not aware? You feel the Americans are not aware that persons who have been detained and connected with all kinds of criminality was a beneficiary and is now sitting in the cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago? What moral authority does the Prime Minister have to come and speak to any one of us about crime in this country? And she must tell the country, including the Attorney General, what is the real reason for a state of emergency. Trust me, if they spend 5 years in government, it might be 5 years of state of emergency, because it is all about their self-preservation. Thank you.
I didn't make a particular point because I didn't want to speak for too long. But you need, as media, to look at something. Now, you know, when the PNM is in government, we believe that the media takes a side and bashes the PNM. When the UNC is in government, they say that they get bashed, but we don't think so. Okay? And there are some issues taking place in this country over the last 9 months that I find the media has been very silent about. And this Hilton fiasco flows from one of those issues that you, the media, are not talking about, and it's nepotism. Because the chairman of ETEC is the wife of the Senate president, okay? She is Wade Mark's wife. Now, if you look at all the state enterprises that the UNC has appointed boards to, is everybody father, mother, brother, aunt, cousin, nenen, daughter, sister. Unprecedented when you look at the people who are going on to state boards under this UNC administration. Nepotism is rampant. The media isn't talking about it at all. It's as if nepotism is no longer something bad. But look at what has happened here. If I have to read between the lines, the chairman of ETEC has more influence in the government than the Minister of Trade because of her connection to a long-standing senior member of the UNC. And that is where nepotism goes bad. Because if you read the Guardian article, you will see it was a fight between two people. One is a cabinet minister, one is a chairman. But it appears on the face of it that the chairman had more power within the government structure than the minister. So the Minister of Trade lost out. They took ETEC away from the Minister of Trade for no apparent reason. Why would you do that? That thing of hotel management has been under Trade for 60 years. Trade and its predecessors. Why would you just snatch it and put it in land? What's it doing in land? What was the relevance of hotel management in land? But that is a direct outcome of nepotism. And I would like you all to please look at that.
Good morning, Kim Bodram from The Express. I think either the opposition leader or maybe Dr. Brown, for my first question, well, I probably should have let MP Impert answer, but it's okay. It's okay. I just want to bring up Cuba again, and I think what I want to ask about Cuba is not to be negative and create some negative scenarios, but really to just sort of explore, you know, the position, for lack of a better word, that Trinidad is in currently in its relationship with Cuba. And then, but in the midst of all of that, all kinds of things could happen. I mean, there are natural disasters, for instance, and in the past, Trinidad and Cuba would have had exchanges when things happen, natural disasters and these sort of things. You know, I mean, just diplomatically, how does a government navigate something like if a natural disaster were to happen, or any sort of disaster in Cuba where ordinarily CARICOM would have rallied and gone towards them, you know, how to navigate something like that. And Cuba has also been good to CARICOM in the past with medication, different types of aid. So just how to navigate that in the event of something ongoing now.
Well, Kim, we are lucky to have with us the former Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, as you said. So maybe I could ask him to come and say a few words on that.
Good afternoon to all colleagues, especially recognizing the leader of the opposition. So thank you for the question. I think the question really speaks to a concern on the part of many of our citizens. I've been very pleased that people of this country are paying attention, and there's so many issues, so many crises presented by this government, but the change in policy with Cuba seems to have touched people in their hearts because we've grown up being aware that the Cubans have their challenges, their political realities, etc. But with this overriding strong sense of a link that binds us together within the Caribbean Sea and this sense of solidarity with the cause of the Cuban people. I want to remind you and remind the people of this country that Trinidad and Tobago recognized Cuba even before the founding of CARICOM. We recognized Cuba way back in 1972, when some of us weren't even born as yet. And then CARICOM was founded in 1973. So this is not of recent vintage, and that solidarity has survived and been outlived many administrations in this country, including former UNC administration. So this current government seems to have flip-flopped completely with no reason or rationale offered to the people of this country. And there's a long list of issues where the Prime Minister, in a democracy, a serious Prime Minister, would at minimum have addressed the Parliament. As the Leader of the Opposition just said, this is our understanding. This is the evidence that has been brought to us. This is our reasoning, and this is our justification for changing a national position and actually a regional position. So you're right. Cuba has been at our side through the pandemic, through the crisis in the healthcare system in this country, where it's not just doctors, it's nurses, it's pharmacists, it's lab technicians, phlebotomists, a wide range of healthcare providers that have come here, not to lie on Maracas Beach, to save lives of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Now when they need us most, when they are starving, literally, when incubators are shut off in Cuban hospitals due to a lack of fuel and a military blockade of that country, Trinidad and Tobago, not the people of this country, the Prime Minister and the Cabinet and government have literally turned their backs. Officially, we're getting it in the foreign press, the reports coming out of this CELAC meeting, where we have disassociated ourselves, even from calling for an end to the blockade, which we have done every single year that this blockade has been in place, without any announcement by the government or any justification. That is a shame and disgrace, and another sign endorsing the call by the Leader of the Opposition of a government of cowards. That's not how business is done, and it's a disgrace. So.
I just want to make the point and remind us in 2016, when you had Ebola and Zika, that the United States entered an agreement with Cuba for Cuban doctors to go to the United States to assist. You asked a very important question on the issue of disaster. Internationally, it is recognized that Cuba has probably the best in the world disaster program when you have a hurricane or when you have an earthquake. I mean, they can literally move hundreds of thousands of people in an hour. And many countries, I mean, I learned it from when I was in the United Nations. I have had the opportunity to go to Cuba, so I know, I feel, a certain amount of empathy and passion having gone there and having seen how resilient they are following the decision taken for the years of blockage, by the United States, as it relates to trade and other matters. So yes, your point is very important, and that's why I talked about, you may not have been here when I spoke about Tobago in particular as a small country with a number of Cuban doctors working there, and indicating that even when their contract had ended, that they were able to then, apply and be interviewed by the THRE and be properly considered once they are sufficiently qualified.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are getting very, very close to the end, as the media well knows. I know we have about one question each from the members. I don't know if maybe, Kim, if you can ask yours now.
It was just one more quick question, maybe a little bit of a doomsaying question that maybe MP Imbert could answer, sort of bringing together, because last night I think I did hear Dr. Brown, I think it was in the Senate, speaking about job loss, small and micro enterprises. MP Imbert has spoken about Hilton. There are things happening in energy. So maybe and then everything is, of course, an ecosystem impacted by, if something happens in health, there are trickle-down effects all over. To sort of bring under one umbrella the opposition's concerns. you know, where we're going and the kind of impact we might start to see on the ground economically with everything that's happening. And when you lose something like Hilton, how do you get it back?
Well, Kim, I don't know that we have to talk about what we may start to see. We are seeing it. We are seeing the microeconomies or local economies being devastated, starting first of all, obviously with rampant job losses that impact the community, the economy at that level. We are seeing it across the thing. But I will ask MP Ember to come and speak.
A very difficult question to answer. What I can tell you, though, one of the hallmarks of the PNO administration from 2015 to 2025 was that every single month, every single public servant got their salary on time. Okay? Especially during COVID. Not only did we pay salaries on time for people who were at home and not providing any service, but we decided to be compassionate and humanitarian and pay them. That was a feature of the PNM administration. I don't know what's happening now. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. They'll get a little bump from the war in Iran. You'll get some money from that, because, I mean, you will have seen oil and gas prices. But that doesn't deal with the structural problems in terms of the way they're approaching the economy, in terms of the way they're just overtaxing people and creating new taxes. And that leads to tax evasion. So if you want to look down the road, I think it's very gray. But I want to stress that we, through very difficult times, with oil price going to $25, COVID knocking $20 billion out of the Treasury on an annual basis, we paid public servant salaries every month, every single public service, on time. Not this kind of bacchanal that you're seeing here.
My question is to the opposition leader, if you don't mind. Mention would have been made by Mr. Gonzalez, the MP, in terms of the letter from the Telecommunications Authority, which, if I'm not mistaken, would have centered around a particular word used by the former leader of the PNM and former Prime Minister. So I'm just wondering on two things, because you also had a post in which you talked about communication you had with him in terms of the invitation issue. So on those two matters, what essentially apparently led TAT to issue the letter and also the invitation. Have you had any recent communication with Dr. Rowley on those matters? And what is your present sort of, from the standpoint of opposition leader, former leader of the PNM, how have the both of you communicating or consulting, as the case may be?
Well, as I said in my post, which I don't want to add much to that, but yes, we, if there was an issue that Dr. Rowley raised as it relates to the letter and concerns, and I feel it's necessary to chat with him. I chat with him. I know he too, from time to time, he would, if there's an issue, he would call me. So we are in contact, and it was sufficiently important for me to be able to contact him because it was a matter in the public domain. It's an internal matter. We are doing our internal checks and balances as a party celebrating 70 years. And that's why I made the point that it was important to make sure that, you review your communication process. Don't just take it lightly, but make sure you do your checks and balances. And that's precisely what we did.
The issue of the word in terms of the issue of the word and
what word are you talking about?
The particular word that the former leader used in reference to the Prime Minister, that apparently is the issue of the TAC letter. Have you had any discussion with him on that?
No, I haven't had any discussion with him on that matter, but I certainly will. I would raise it with him as well. Yes, I will.
Opposition leader, just to follow up on this. This is not my question. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But the Minister, Nicholas Morris, at a post-cabinet media conference, challenged you to speak out on the controversial remark made by Dr. Rowley, saying that in the period of International Women's Day and what have you, as a woman, that you should have rejected the statements outright. What's your response to that?
Let me just say a couple things. I have been in politics a long time, and I made the point ago, I think you may have asked me the question outside the parliament about politicians, communications, and how we interact with each other. And I talked about the fact that, you know, young people, everybody is listening. But let me just make it abundantly clear. You see this thing called provocation? It's a very dangerous thing to do. Because if we go back in history, the same Prime Minister calling Dr. Rowley Urio. Now, I don't know where Mr. Nicholas was at that time. Rapists. Okay, and I want Mr. Nicholas to go to the parliament, and I want him to listen to the motion of no confidence under this Prime Minister in the parliament, and listen to the reckless, dangerous, disgusting statements that were made.
Doris, thank you so much for your last question. I do believe, opposition leader, you wanted to close.
Thank you very much. I just want to, just some greetings, very important, so that there were 17,000, or there are 17,937 students who will be undertaking the essay exams tomorrow. Interesting, 9,095 males and 8,844 girls. So 9,095 boys, 8,842 girls. And I know that our former Minister of Education, you know, already, you know, brought some greetings and gave them some encouragement. As a leader of the opposition myself, you know, I kind of thought of what it was like for me doing common entrance many, many years ago. You know, and your own, the fact that you're nervous and that your parents on that special day would, you know, whether it's your mother or your father, would give you a special hug, wish you the best, tell you, listen, don't worry, just go and do your best. So I just want to say to them tomorrow, I'm sure somebody, you know, I'm wishing somebody gives you a hug and somebody says to you, very simple, go and do your best. Say your prayers before, go and do your best. We are also in the season of the Festival of Navratri, which comes to an end on the 27th of March, which of course celebrates the various incarnations and victories over terrible demons. And it's a festival for 9 days. I also want to wish, of course, the Hindu community and to recognize the importance of that festival. We also have the Spiritual Baptists. I just want to bring greetings on their Diamond 75th anniversary with the repeal of the oppressive 1917 Shouter Baptist Ordinance. This day, of course, is a celebration of resilience of the people who worship through their Baptist faith. And I want to take the opposition on behalf of the People's National Movement to wish them Shouter Baptist Liberation Day 2026. And it's Holy Week as well. Mr. Imbert made sure and reminded me of that. Sunday the 29th, which would be Palm Sunday, which talks about, you know, you're recounting the passion of Christ and tells about the whole issue of betrayal, but more importantly about the ultimate sacrifice. So Trinidad and Tobago is very fortunate. You know, and sometimes we don't realize we are multicultural, multi-religious. There are not many countries in the world where you would have had the celebration of Eid, you know, celebration of Easter, celebration of Shouter Baptist, celebration of Navratri. And it tells you that notwithstanding all the negatives that may exist from time to time, let us celebrate that Trinidad and Tobago is still a very beautiful place, and there's much for us to celebrate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leader. Thank you to all of you who have joined us online, and of course the media and our colleagues who are present with us. The opposition will return next week to speak to you again. Thank you.